Gilgamesh said to Urshanabi, "Come here. Look at this marvelous plant, the antidote to the fear of death. With it we return to the youth we once had." Gilgamesh saw a pond of cool water. He left the plant on the ground and bathed. A snake smelled its fragrance. Stealthily, it crawled up and carried the plant away. As it disappeared, it cast off its skin. When Gilgamesh saw what the snake had done, he sat down and wept. He said to the boatman, "What shall I do now? All my hardships have been for nothing." Imagine being a scientist. Are you picturing wearing glasses and a lab coat, holding a beaker or lighting a Bunsen burner, writing another draft of a grant, tracking down page numbers for a reference lost after rounds of revision? Are you picturing constructing a multimedia projection apparatus connected to a monkey cage to show hundreds of images of snakes, spiders, flowers, and mushrooms for milliseconds at a time? Or surgically attaching a brace to a monkey's skull to keep its brain still for imaging? In 2006, the primatologist Lynn Isbell introduced snake detection hypothesis in her paper, Snakes as Agents of Evolutionary Change in Primate Brains, in the Journal of Human Evolution. Due to unusual public interest, Isbell wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, Snakes on the Brain, where she summarizes the science for the lay reader. New anthropological evidence suggests that snakes, as predators, may have figured prominently in the evolution of primate vision, the ability shared by humans, apes, and monkeys to see the world in crisp, three-dimensional, living color. The hypothesis would replace previous theories explaining the development of advanced primate vision and cognition, such as arboreal theory, which credits the need of primates to navigate through trees, but can't explain how other mammals with poor vision, like squirrels, also made trees their habitat. Another, visual predation hypothesis, which credits the need to detect insects, a primary source of nutrition, was flawed because primates could use hearing and smelling. Moreover, primate diets switched to favor fruit, whose sweet smell allowed the brain to allocate more resources to vision. Primates, the ancestors of Homo sapiens, trees, snakes, and fruit. Maybe you have already made the connection. In 2011, Isbell published The Fruit, the Tree, and the Serpent, expanding on what was now snake detection theory. It begins, if you are holding this book in your hands and you are reading these words, you can thank your primate ancestors. Of all mammals, only primates can both grasp objects in their hands and see so well that they can distinguish easily between the individual squiggles that we humans use to create our written words. The reaction to the original article may have inspired the biblical reference in the title. Perhaps the snake detection theory hit a nerve because it connects humans and evolution, two words that do not go together in the same sentence for some people. Perhaps other people had an adverse gut reaction because the snake detection theory sounds a lot like the story of Eve and the serpent, and maybe they thought it was developed to support the creation story common to the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. I myself enjoy imagining that the person who originally came up with the story of Eve and the serpent was simply a very good naturalist. Isbell did not begin her career researching the relationship between snakes and primates. She stumbled on the connection while pursuing a different question: why female primates in South and Central America are more likely to disperse, while Old World female primates stay home. Predation is a risk of dispersal, so Isbell explored selection pressure from predators, including large cats, birds of prey, and snakes. Thus began what was to become a 10-year near obsession to solve what gripped me as no murder mystery had ever done before. Isbell found Old World primates have trichromatic vision. They can distinguish between red and green, while New World primates, who evolved without the selection pressure of venomous snakes, are red-green colorblind. Further research revealed lemurs, primates that evolved in Madagascar, where there are no snake predators, have the simplest visual systems of all. Isbell then connected research across disciplines, including neuroscience and evolutionary biology, and even non-scientific topics like myth and religion. The picture that emerged had uncanny similarities to the biblical story of Eve and the serpent in Genesis. Isbell explains, "I will argue that a more singular pre-adaptation for acute vision and large brains was the enjoyment of a diet of fruits and nectar, Eve's fruit, when snakes, the serpent, appeared. A particularly powerful selective pressure that favored expansion of the visual sense. Only ancestral mammals having a diet of fruits or nectar from flowers in that arboreal milieu could afford to expand their visual systems, as such expansion typically occurs at a cost to olfaction. This theory has broad implications about human nature. I have come to see that the heady position of snakes as our destroyers and creators in religion, myth, and folklore has not been too far off from what the scientific evidence shows. This book will offer you a new way of looking at our primate origins, revealing the ultimate reasons behind both our deepest fears and our strongest, most persistent, and most extraordinary attributes. If snakes played an important role in our development, we should consider whether our evolutionary relationship may be responsible for an innate basis of snake symbolism, which could answer the question of a crooked line, whether the prevalence of snake symbolism is a result of natural or formal conditions. Isbell notes briefly other cultural traditions where snake symbolism plays a role: Aboriginal, Australian, and Chinese creation myths, Norse mythology, folklore from Africa, India, and North America, Indiana Jones, and Harry Potter. But the book only references symbolism from the Garden of Eden, implicitly suggesting the Bible is the best version of the mythology. The study of snakes and primates seems to have been wrapped up in biblical stories for many scientists since the very beginning. I don't know if it's a form of academic trolling, but it seems like relating human evolution to the Eden story is irresistible. In 1878, the American naturalist Arthur E. Brown published The Serpent and the Ape, about an experiment inspired by an anecdote in Charles Darwin's The Ascent of Man that involved scaring monkeys at the Philadelphia Zoological Garden by throwing a dead, coiled-up snake into their cage. The monkeys fled to the sides of the cage, chattering and screaming. Other animals did not react fearfully, and even tried to eat the dead snake. Brown writes, "The home of the monkey and the spot where, in all probability, the earlier primates first saw the light is in those regions of the earth which are most infested by numerous and venomous serpents." Like Isbell, he combines natural history with biblical story. These facts will at once suggest to all who put their faith in the theory of gradual development that the fear of the serpent became instinctive in some far distant progenitor of man, by reason of his long exposure to danger and death in a horrible form. From its bite, the evidence of its influence, to the story of the serpent in paradise, to the signs and symbols of many ancient mythologies, and to the feeling which few men can deny to themselves when they are brought into association with even the most beautiful and harmless member of the order Ophidia. Isbell looks at past research, from contemporary studies of snakes and primates to observations going back in scientific history. She quotes Darwin from his 1872 book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. "I put my face close to the thick glass plate in front of a puff adder in the zoological gardens, with the firm determination of not starting back if the snake struck at me. But as soon as the blow was struck, my resolution went for nothing, and I jumped a yard or two backwards with astonishing rapidity. My will and reason were powerless against the imagination of a danger which had never been experienced." Isbell also references the 1907 article On the Feeding of Reptiles in Captivity by the zoologist Peter Chalmers Mitchell, where he writes, "Many naturalists have recorded that monkeys display an instinctive fear of snakes. Like Isbell, he noticed lemurs did not have the same fear of the writhing snakes carried into their cages. But the Old World monkeys of all the genera in the Society's collection recognized the snakes instantly and bolted panic-stricken, chattering loudly and retreating to their boxes or as high up as possible in the larger cages." He concludes, "It is probable that human beings have inherited this specific fear of snakes from their anthropoid ancestors." Isbell builds snake detection theory on a lot of pre-existing science from multiple disciplines. Studies in biogeography and evolutionary biology are used to reconstruct the evolutionary timeline by tracing the fossil record. The relevant interactions between snakes and primates happened between 30 and 60 million years ago by different estimates. It's hard to conceive of that timescale. Isbell provides context by showing the movement of continents over time, aligning with theories on where primates evolved and how they dispersed across the planet. She also works through complex neuroscience, much of which relates to the study of fear. Isbell writes, "Snakes are so predictable in creating fear responses in monkeys that scientists often use them as the stimulus in studies of fear and the amygdala. The only logical conclusion is that snakes harmed primates so often in the past that the fear of snakes is now a very real part of them." Today, descendants of Old World groups, even those with no lived experience with snakes, show extreme fear of snakes on sight. Ophidiophobia, the irrational fear of snakes, is common in humans and primates, and is advantageous for the study of phobia because snakes are not a current threat to most humans alive today. But they look the same as they did 100 million years ago, before primates existed. Primates have two visual processing systems in the brain, both of which expanded over time. But in anthropoids, higher primates, including monkeys, apes, and humans, a neural pathway called the superior colliculus pulvinar was favored. This pathway is associated with processing danger. It is subcortical, meaning it does not travel through the cortex, which is associated with conscious thought. Studies show this region is activated when people view images of snakes, as well as the fearful expressions of other people. It is automatic, meaning fear reactions occur without conscious awareness, suggesting an innate origin in brain parts that developed before the cortex. Isbell relies in part on the work of the psychologist Arnie Ehrman, who studied phobia throughout a career spanning 5 decades, 250 articles, and over 50,000 citations. Ehrman was never specifically interested in either primates or snakes, but his interest in fear led him to study their relationship. In the 1960s, he studied Pavlovian conditioning of fear and became interested in phobias. In the 80s, he looked at potential evolutionary causes of phobia, testing human and animal reactions to emotion expressions. In the 90s, some of his most cited work focused on unconscious or automatic reactions related to phobias. Then in 2001, 2 of his most cited papers tested unconscious detection and fear responses of snakes by primates. In Emotion Drives Attention, Detecting the Snake in the Grass, Ehrman and his co-authors demonstrate human subjects could detect evolutionarily fear-relevant images, snakes and spiders, more quickly than fear-irrelevant images, flowers and mushrooms. In Fears, Phobias, and Preparedness, written with psychologist Susan Meinecke, Ehrman explains that they used monkeys as subjects when using humans would be unethical. Because of self-evident ethical constraints, the level of aversiveness that human research participants can be exposed to is rather limited, and hence it could be questioned whether the electrical shocks typically used are of sufficient intensity to generate a genuine fear response. Their work shows fear is automatically triggered by images of snakes, before conscious awareness is possible. Activated in the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped part of the brain responsible for processing emotion, in a module shaped by evolution and dedicated to fear. This evolutionary relationship is reinforced by studies showing snake-naive or lab-raised monkeys with no natural exposure to snakes have the same automatic fear response. In 2003, Ehrman and Meinecke followed up with The Malicious Serpent, Snakes as a Prototypical Stimulus for an Evolved Module of Fear, which presented new findings and reviewed previous studies, showing that neither the elicitation nor the conditioning of snake fear in humans requires that snakes be consciously perceived. Rather, both processes can occur with masked stimuli. Masked stimuli is a technical approach in which the snake image appears for 20 or 30 milliseconds before being masked by fear-irrelevant images which disrupt visual processing, showing the fear of snakes can be triggered without involving cortical brain areas responsible for visual awareness. Ehrman says automatic processes in the brain, inaccessible to conscious control, inherited through millions of years of evolution, trigger phobic fear. To explain, he references Sigmund Freud's view of the unconscious. By investing the unconsciously originated anxiety in a symbolically related external object, which can be avoided, it is assumed that the ego can be saved from manifest anxiety. Through references in Isbell, Ehrman, and Meinecke's work, I tried to trace the study of snakes, monkeys, and fear back through the scientific literature. The details in these studies are fascinating. The clinical descriptions of experimental conditions, where the number of subjects and their demographics, details of the methods of media projection and image contents are all reported. In these descriptions, the accidental death of a monkey subject and the number of left-handed participants are treated with the same tone and concision. The experiments respond to each other and add variations. So details like the use of spider, snake, flower, and mushroom images repeat over and over. In 1989, Meinecke's study demonstrated that monkeys can develop a fear of snakes, but not flowers, by observing fear in other monkeys. For the experiment, videos were edited to juxtapose footage of monkeys behaving fearfully with fear-relevant stimuli, footage of toy snakes and crocodiles, or fear-irrelevant stimuli, flowers and toy rabbits. They aim to understand why phobia of snakes, spiders, and heights are common, while fear of more likely dangers like hammers, guns, and electrical outlets are uncommon. Like Ehrman's work on prepared phobia, this work responds to psychologist Martin Seligman's preparedness theory, first presented in 1970, which suggests an evolutionarily inherited predisposition for phobia of subjects that posed a danger to our ancestors. Humans are prepared to be conditioned to this fear, meaning it isn't always present but can emerge. This is not quite a hardwired snake in the brain, but it's close. In a 1976 paper, Unprepared Phobias, Seligman writes, "One might expect that within a city population, the prevalence of fear of lambs should approximate that of the fear of snakes. In practice, however, the fear of snakes is common and the fear of lambs is rare. Moreover, a genuine fear of snakes often is reported by people who have had no contact with the reptiles." Seligman concludes that the fear of snakes must either be innate, transmitted indirectly, or lurking, and will appear with only slight provocation. Seligman rejected the premise of conditioning theory, that any stimulus could be conditioned to any response, after looking at failed experimental attempts to condition infants to fear simple objects. For example, the psychologist C.W. Valentine tried to condition his own baby to fear a pair of opera glasses by blowing a hidden wooden whistle whenever the child reached for the glasses. That failed, but the method worked for a caterpillar. In 1930, Valentine wrote The Innate Bases of Fear, arguing against the conditioning model popularized by the influential behaviorist J.B. Watson. Valentine describes countless attempts to scare his own infant children, with methods including crowing like a cock, tearing a sheet of paper, playing discordant piano key combinations, playing a scale slowly on an accordion, crawling like a monkey, wearing a hideous mask, and placing a white rat nearby. Meinecke's studies did not always correspond with snake detection theory. In 1980, a study exposed 10 lab-raised and 10 wild-raised monkeys to real snakes and snake-like objects, and measured their fear response by behavioral disturbance and unwillingness to approach food. The monkeys had been deprived 2/3 of their normal daily ration to ensure hunger. 8 of 10 wild-raised monkeys showed fear versus only 2 of 10 lab-raised. This paper also summarized previous research to situate the findings in the debate about innate fear. It has long been known that many adult primate species exhibit a marked fear of snakes. Some investigators who have studied this fear have suggested or assumed that it was innate or spontaneous. Other investigators, by contrast, have argued that some form of learning or social tradition is likely to be involved in the origins of fear. As we look at experiments performed earlier in the 20th century, the cruelty endemic to the scientific practices becomes harder to ignore, in part because the methods seem less ethically considered, but also because they are described more frankly. Dio Hebb's 1946 paper on the nature of fear sides with the position of innate fear. Hebb performed experiments on 30 chimpanzees in which they were coaxed toward a box where they expected to find food, but instead found a test object, selected from a mix of snake-like and non-snake-like but fear-inducing objects, including a papier-mâché model of an adult chimpanzee head, an unclothed human baby doll, a wax model of an infant chimpanzee head, an infant chimpanzee cadaver, a human mannequin head, the skull of a chimpanzee with a movable jaw manipulated by a string, the roughly mounted skin of a spider monkey with the head and shoulders manipulated by a string, a plaster model of a chimpanzee death mask, a head with no ears, a cured chimpanzee hide with distorted face and head but recognizable hands and feet, a toy dog puppet, A grub model, a smaller grub model, a rubber tube with one end shaped like a snake head, a wooden bug model, a toy grasshopper, a toy turtle, a small rubber dog, a cloth dog toy, and a painted replica of a coiled snake. Overall, the chimpanzees responded most fearfully to the skull with a moving jaw and second to the snake replica. Hebb argues that the spontaneity of the responses and lack of experience points to a physiological rather than a psychological or behaviorist model. Hebb agrees with Valentine's criticism of Watsonian theory, arguing that conditioning only works when there is an existing emotional susceptibility. A 1953 paper by Jules Masserman and Curtis Pechtel, called Neuroses in Monkeys, is also cited in favor of innate fear. They discovered they could use psychological traumata in place of physical means like electric shocks to produce neurotic symptoms, similar to humans in monkeys, while studying the effects of repeated motivational conflicts or presenting subjects with fear stimuli alongside snacks or other desirable items. The apparatus designed for the project would not look out of place in a Saw film. The monkeys were held in glass boxes. An interface controlled electronics to engage lights, metronomes, buzzers, valves releasing odors, and a projector to show animated snakes and lizards. Snakings, the author's term for presenting a toy snake for 30 seconds, initially caused fear responses including horripilation, the technical term which I learned while reading the paper for goosebumps, alarmed vocalizations, rapid breathing, and ejectile defecation lasting for 15 to 30 minutes. After multiple exposures, signs of distress increased, including trembling, mydriasis, the technical term for pupil dilation, increased urination and defecation, resistance to being caged, and an eagerness to leave the apparatus and the laboratory. Monkeys avoided favorite foods or frantically overate, swallowed air to the point of abdominal swelling, had diarrhea and gastrointestinal hypermotility. Some experienced loss of motor function or full body control and skeletal osteoporosis. Males lost interest in mating. One male spent most of 10 months fondling his penis and swallowing semen sucked from its glands. Neurotic monkeys lost their status in the overall group and clung together. Afterwards, they took up to a year to recover, requiring individualized therapy. These events are all described forthrightly and represent the success of the experimental models. The whole thing reminds me of the scenes in the TV show Lost, where we see the character Carl Martin in Room 23, the torture chamber where he's restrained in a chair watching a strange collage of images and text on television, wearing goggles with lights and listening to deafening techno music. On the side against innate fear, Meinecke cites the 1936 paper by Robert Yerkes and Ada Yerkes, Nature and Conditions of Avoidance, Fear Response in Chimpanzees. In the experiment, they showed infant, child, and adult chimpanzees a series of items: a shuttlecock, a rubber dog, a rubber tube, a live tortoise, and a glass snake. They concluded there was no innate fear response because adult chimpanzees showed greater fear of snakes than infants. Yerkes was an influential figure in 20th century primatology, but he seems absent from more recent work, perhaps because of his controversial legacy, which includes the support of beliefs like eugenics and biological racism. He founded the Yerkes Laboratories of Primate Biology at Yale, where many studies by Dio Hebb and others were done. Yerkes typifies the strange relationship between subjects and experimenters in primatology, as Donna Haraway notes in her 1989 book, Primate Visions. Primates have been distinguished from other animals by their eyes and their hypertrophied visual cortex of the brain. Perhaps that is why monkeys, apes, and human beings seem to move about, reflecting each other in an elaborate show in a house of mirrors. Haraway notes that Yerkes seems to have had a genuinely loving relationship with his primate subjects, but this love was intrinsically bound up with power. The colonizing logic of paternalistic domination, a kind of civilizing mission, pervaded every level of Yerkes' science, including the personal relation of human being and animal. Meinecke also cites studies by Paul Schiller, done at Yerkes Laboratories in 1952, which found no evidence of innate responses to snakes in primates. In the first, 2 chimpanzees were raised in darkness for the first year of their lives, and then trained to differentiate between glass jars containing an orange or a dead coiled snake, using a milk reward and electric shock punishment, swapped for each monkey, and found no difference in the rate of conditioning. This is both quite convincing and fucking insane. Another experiment exposed 52 chimpanzees to snakes and other stimuli in glass boxes, finding infants showed no fear response, while most adults specifically feared snakes, but not lizards, toads, or large insects. Another experiment demonstrated adult chimpanzees could be trained not to fear snakes by placing a banana above the case, reducing the fearful monkeys from 34 to 2 over 12 trials, or by adding an electric shock to only 8 trials. As a non-scientist, it's hard not to be distracted by the absurdity, the cruelty, and the frankness with which these experiments are described. That does not discredit the findings, but it speaks to the effects of the cultural biases of the experimenters in their treatment of subjects. As noted in Ehrman's work, monkeys are used as a proxy for humans in cases where using human subjects would be unethical, in part because they are viewed as a kind of primitive or natural state of man, as Haraway shows in quoting Yerkes. Availability and social inhibitions prevent most direct use of human beings as experimental objects, but study of the other primates may prove the most direct and economical route to profitable knowledge of ourselves, because in them, basic mechanisms are less obscured by cultural influences. In modern science, the treatment of primates can seem no less cruel, even if described in more clinical terms. In a 2004 study testing the efficacy of monkeys as subjects for studying mechanisms underlying human emotion and psychology, 9 monkeys underwent a surgical procedure that used an acid solution to lesion their amygdalas in different combinations. The monkeys were then tested for fearfulness when offered favorite food items next to a clear box containing a roll of blue masking tape, a fake rubber snake, or a live northern pine snake. Bilaterally lesioned monkeys were significantly less afraid of the snake, suggesting the automatic fear processing module in the amygdala is responsible for ophidiophobia. The lesion monkeys were humanely killed using methods consistent with the recommendations on the panel of euthanasia of the American Veterinary Medical Association. Modern papers do tend to describe the conditions of the subject, showing at least the awareness of the relevance. For example, a previously mentioned study notes that the lab-raised monkeys were bred in groups, their cages had 3 sets of perches at different heights, they were undisturbed until testing began at 16 weeks of age, the cages were temperature controlled, had windows for natural light, they had as much water and WAIN 25% protein monkey diet as needed, and got fruit and vitamins twice a week. 2 papers from 2013 and 2014 that include Isbell as a co-author used restraining devices surgically attached to the monkey subjects' skulls to keep them steady for brain imaging, done while measuring their responses to images of snakes, angry monkey faces, monkey hands, and abstract shapes. These experiments underwent ethical review, and the papers describe the efforts to monitor the health of the monkeys and minimize suffering. One paper notes, no monkeys were sacrificed. The treatment of subjects has not gone unnoticed by the world outside of science. Disturbing videos of monkeys in cages, similar to the descriptions in many of these studies, have been released to the public via FOIA request by organizations like PETA. In 2023, a letter to the National Institutes of Health, signed by 380 scientists, called for the end of funding to cruel experiments with monkeys, referencing various studies, including one where an apparatus termed the Pit of Despair by the researcher who created it was designed to induce depression in monkeys by isolating infants from their mothers. It seems ironic that scientists who want to understand fear end up spending their careers scaring their subjects, human and monkey. In 1977, Carl Sagan also questioned the ethics of studies involving monkeys in his book on the evolution of human intelligence, The Dragons of Eden. The book generally argues the human mind can be explained by physiology alone, a non-dualist, scientific materialist view, while considering the connections between the biblical story of Eden and the science. Sagan references more experiments on monkey brains, including a case where electrical stimulation was shown to cause visual hallucinations in both humans who reported seeing a butterfly and an ape who appeared to be attempting to catch one. Sagan argues the shared brain structures that make monkeys good subjects, like the larger prefrontal lobes, are also what gives us a sense of consciousness, often deemed the basis for moral consideration, where our sense of self and free will originate. He asks, if chimpanzees have consciousness, if they are capable of abstractions, do they not have what until now has been described as human rights? How smart does a chimpanzee have to be before killing him constitutes murder? What further properties must he show before religious missionaries must consider him worthy of attempts at conversion? Another troll maybe, since missionaries often would not believe in evolution. Sagan continues, why exactly all over the civilized world, in virtually every major city, are apes in prison? Sagan says the oldest components of the brain are shared with fish and snakes, as well as monkeys and mammals. Although more recently developed parts of the brain are used for communication, Sagan calls some human behavior reptilian. He quotes the philosopher Susanne Langer. Human life is shot through and through with ritual, as it is also with animalian practices. It is an intricate fabric of reason and right, of knowledge and religion, prose and poetry, fact and dream. Ritual, like art, is essentially the active termination of a symbolic transformation of experience. It is born in the cortex, not in the old brain, but is born of an elementary need of that organ once the organ has grown to human estate. According to Sagan, the story of Eden corresponds well with the archaeological evidence and is an appropriate metaphor for the major biological changes in human evolution. It is not so remarkable as to require us to believe in a kind of biological memory of ancient historic events. But it does seem to me close enough to risk at least raising the question. The only repository of such a biological memory is, of course, the genetic code. He also connects the fear of snakes in monkeys with the story of Eden. He cites the work of anthropologist Sherwood Washburn, noting young primates exhibit an untaught fear of snakes. These conjectures of the origins of the mammals constitute a kind of scientific myth. They may have some germ of truth in them, but they are unlikely to be the whole story. That scientific myths make contact with more ancient myths may or may not be a coincidence. It is entirely possible that we are able to invent scientific myths only because we have previously been exposed to the other sort. He then adds a complicating observation. Does the metaphor of the serpent refer to the use of the aggressive and ritualistic reptilian component of our brain in the further evolution of the neocortex? With one exception, the Genesis account of the temptation by a reptile in Eden is the only instance in the Bible of humans understanding the language of animals. When we feared dragons, were we fearing a part of ourselves? Maybe this helps explain the multiple meanings of the serpent symbol. Sagan also quotes from Darwin's The Ascent of Man, in a passage that overturns the idea that humans are more deserving of moral consideration than monkeys. The main conclusion arrived at in this work, namely, that man is descended from some lowly organized form, will, I regret to think, be highly distasteful to many persons. But there can hardly be a doubt that we are descended from barbarians. For my own part, I would as soon be descended from that heroic little monkey as from a savage who delights to torture his enemies, offers up bloody sacrifices, practices infanticide without remorse, treats his wives like slaves, knows no decency, and is haunted by the grossest superstitions. In Made Visions, Donna Haraway analyzes how science interacts with narrative, possibly explaining why scientific works can't resist making reference to biblical stories. Writing, "The history of science appears as a narrative about the history of technical and social means to produce the facts. The facts themselves are types of stories, a testimony of experience. Scientific practice may be considered a kind of storytelling practice, a rule-governed, constrained, historically changing craft of narrating the history of nature. In this context, primatology is a particularly appropriate subject for interpretation, as monkeys, apes, and human beings emerge in primatology inside elaborate narratives about origins, natures, and possibilities." According to Haraway, these stories come from a scientific history dominated by Judeo-Christian researchers, for whom there is a constant refrain drawn from salvation history. Primatology is about primal stories, the origin and nature of man, and about Reformation stories, the reform and reconstruction of human nature. That the origins of primatology are so wrapped up in narratives stemming from biblical tradition and reflecting man's position of dominance in the natural world does not necessarily mean modern science suffers from the same biases. And in most individual papers, we don't see this imprint so clearly. But the history illuminates the background that influences the methods of scientists and the questions they ask. The irony is that despite the materialist view we expect from scientists, humans are still not considered animals, at least from a moral or philosophical perspective. Animals are both similar enough to us to learn from their behavior, but somehow different enough to be exempt from moral consideration. At the heart of the question of innate knowledge, of snakes or otherwise, is our connection to the animals we descend from. Since Isbell's first paper, many scientists have tested and responded to snake detection theory. Isbell has collaborated with other authors on studies that mostly focus on a neuroscience approach, using brain imaging to determine when fear is registered when looking at images with variations of snake postures, image distortion, and comparison with other animals. Many studies by other researchers tested monkeys, children, and adults in new variations, showing snakes in different grids with other images and measuring detection, distraction, brain activity in various regions, sweat and cortisol levels, and other variables. There are also studies that find evidence against snake detection theory, or the theories it builds on, pointing to potential issues in previous studies like sample size, task complexity, the lab setting of experiments not being ecologically valid, efficacy of the image masking process, lack of comparison to other predators, the evolutionary timeline, and functions of specific brain modules. Some take issue with the idea of prepared fear and whether people can experience fear without conscious awareness or semantic categorization. While the details of the neuroscience and historical evolutionary timeline are debated, much of the recent research corroborates snake detection theory, or in cases where it calls it into question, do not dismiss it outright, but find problems with specific components of the theory. Parsing these studies, trying to understand where they connect, build on, or refute one another, is not natural to me as a non-scientist. At first, it felt like crawling across a vast spider web, trying to track the connections. After a while, it felt more like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. It doesn't help that what we know of the brain is complex and ambiguous. Scientists don't agree on fundamental questions like what causes emotion or constitutes cognition. One of the fundamental components of snake detection theory, derived from the work of Ullmann, Meinecke, and others, is the automatic fear response to evolutionarily relevant subjects. Other scientists question whether emotional responses can be automatic or can occur without conscious awareness. The 1996 book, The Emotional Brain, by Joseph Ledoux, based in part on the work of Ullmann and Meinecke, describes two pathways in the brain that can both trigger emotion, one consciously and the other automatically. He discovered the two pathways in rats. One, dubbed the high road, travels from the thalamus to the cortex and then the amygdala. The other, the low road, travels straight from the thalamus to the amygdala. If one pathway is disabled, the rats still demonstrated fear responses, suggesting fear can be triggered by the amygdala without conscious awareness, which happens in the cortex. In a 2008 paper, Gregory Johnson argues against this claim, critiquing the methods of extrapolating from animal brain behavior to humans, writing, "Even though mammals and most non-mammals share the same or similar brain structures, differences in the sizes of the structures, especially the expansion of the neocortex, is an important feature of the human brain." Berridge illustrates this point succinctly when he says humans can be devastated, rendered into vegetative states by large neocortical lesions, whereas a rat can lose its entire neocortex and continue on remarkably normal. According to Johnson, the thalamus cannot process visual information, and so the thalamus alone cannot respond to the form of a snake, which negates the specific pathway in Ledoux's theory. The 2004 book Gut Reactions by Jesse Prinz explores both sides of the argument on whether emotions can occur without conscious awareness. It details a back and forth between two scientists, Richard Lazarus, who studied fear responses in the 1960s, scaring subjects with things like graphic films of genital surgery performed on adolescent males in a tribal ritual, and the social psychologist Robert Zajonc. In the 1980s, they wrote a series of articles responding to one another, Zajonc taking the side that emotion does not require cognition. In favor of Zajonc's position, Prinz writes about recent studies of the amygdala. This pathway probably mediates the fear response to coiled snake-like objects described earlier. According to Ledoux, the response works as follows. First, we see a snake-like object. It reflects an image on the retinae of our eyes. The retinal images send a signal through the optic nerve into the thalamus, which is the major subcortical hub for the senses, before they send signals to the neocortex. The thalamus can register coarse visual features, but it cannot recognize objects. The amygdala orchestrates a complex bodily response from there, triggering the fight or flight response, changing hormone levels, and controlling motor responses. That's how the image of a snake or snake-like object can trigger a full fear response, without processing in the neocortex, what some consider cognition. But scientists, including Lazarus and Zajonc, disagree on what cognition is. Prinz concludes that most of the immediately plausible definitions of cognition fail. He sides with Zajonc because he thinks some emotions are non-cognitive. He reasons, "We seem to be helpless spectators to our emotional responses. When we react emotionally to a snake or an exam, it is not by act of will. We do not choose to be afraid. Emotions are unthought thoughts, or, as Descartes puts it, emotions are thoughts which are not actions of the soul." It seems we simply do not understand the brain enough to draw definitive conclusions about how cognition occurs. This is not just true in the case of understanding fear, but also in how we understand symbols generally. In the 2017 paper, The Neurocognitive Representation of Symbols, the authors reviewed the literature on cognitive and neural substrates of semantic representations, and concluded, "No theory so far has been able to integrate all the evidence and provide a biologically and computationally sound model that incorporates how symbols in general are acquired, stored, and accessed in the adult brain." In the final chapter of The Fruit, the Tree, and the Serpent, Isbell speculates on how these adaptations to primate vision eventually lead to language. The ability of primates to visually perceive subtle differences leads to more choices, which leads to an adaptation to making quick decisions in new situations. This leads to more advanced cognition and the need to communicate. Vision also leads to declarative pointing, a behavior only exhibited by humans, kind of gesturing that may have led to the evolution of language in general. The book ends with a reference to a theory developed by Huyen San Thong, a scholar and translator of Vietnamese poetry, that the need for mothers to warn their children about snakes was the origin of human language, which could also be related to declarative pointing. Thong was a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Fellowship, which he used to write and self-publish an 800-page study, The Golden Serpent: How Humans Learn to Speak and Invent Culture. I have not been able to track down a copy of the book or the article cited by Isbell, but I found an excerpt on a blog post. It starts with Thong's noticing English and Vietnamese use the same word, ma, to mean mother. There is also a link between the sounds for the words woman, womb, and worm. He then writes something that struck me as feeling familiar. It dawned on me, serendipitously, I had perhaps stumbled onto the origin of language. I've encountered this feeling again and again, looking at snake studies, including Isbell's. It starts with noticing an unexpected connection, then similar connections made by others, then wondering if you've happened upon the secret of human nature. When Thong noticed similarities in English and Vietnamese, he was surprised because he had learned the basic premise of linguistics, was languages are not related through sounds or meanings, but through structure. He calls the feeling of going against linguistic doctrine heretical and subversive. It reminds me of the scientists relating their findings to mythology. In modernity, we've learned there are no absolute truths. Behavior is the product of stochastic biological processes with no sense of beginning or direction. Does this feeling, stumbling into an idea that seems to unlock the truth of an innate human nature, a shared knowledge, excite because it reopens the possibility of a world of mythology and a universe with meaning? We have learned to be skeptical of mythological explanations that are not backed by material evidence. But the stories persist, and we notice the connections. Creation stories differ from culture to culture, suggesting there are no absolutes. Snakes cannot be healers and devils at the same time, but the connections are hard to ignore. If there's something to Isbell's theory, and our vision developed to detect snake forms, and the resulting need for increased brain power eventually led to language, it wouldn't be that crazy to say that any time we're reading text in a book, symbols in a message, signs on the street, we're seeing snakes. Is that an argument in favor of snake naturalism or snake formalism? I'm not sure I know yet.